Let's start with our top story coming out of Afghanistan. President Ashraf Ghani has postponed his presidential swearing-in ceremony until this afternoon in an attempt to end political conflict. Last month, the Election Commission announced Ghani as the winner, but Abdullah rejected the result, declaring himself president. Earlier today, Abdullah also postponed his parallel presidential oath-taking ceremony. Abdullah's office yesterday confirmed that U.S. Special Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad met both leaders but couldn't resolve the conflict. The office said Afghan and foreign politicians are working to end the crisis. Now, the Taliban say peace talks with Kabul are unlikely to take place next week due to the threat of parallel governments in Afghanistan. In a statement, the Taliban spokesman Zabihullah Mujahid urged the presidential rivals to focus on ending the war. Earlier, the Taliban rejected U.S. officials' allegations that they intend to break the Doha peace deal. Disputing the intelligence official's position, Shaheen said the peace agreement is being implemented at a satisfactory pace so far. Meanwhile, the Afghan defense minister said security forces will attack Taliban fighters if they do not stop violence by the end of this week. Washington and the Taliban signed a peace agreement on February 29th to end the 19-year-old Afghan war. Meanwhile, Pakistan has foiled a major terrorist attack during an operation in the country's northern Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. In a press release, the military's media wing said forces killed 2 terrorists in the operation on a terrorist hideout in Diakhan city. In the Inter-Services Public Relations said the militants opened fire on forces as soon as the operation was launched. It said Colonel Mujibur Rahman embraced martyrdom during the gun battle with the terrorists. It said during a sanitization operation, a large cache of arms and ammunition was recovered from the terrorists' hideout. Colonel Mujibur Rahman Shahid hailed from District Asor in Gilgit-Baltistan. In other news, Indian forces have martyred another civilian in the Shopian district of occupied Kashmir. 33 civilians have been martyred in the occupied valley over the last 2 months. Occupation troops targeted the youth in Khwajapura Riban area of the district during a cordon and search operation. Indian forces blocked all entry and exit points of the area and conducted a house-to-house search. The valley is reeling under the crushing curfew and communications blackout by New Delhi for the past 218 days. Now, in India itself, after Lucknow, Uttar Pradesh police have planned to put up photos of anti-citizenship law protesters in Meerut city. Putting their lives at risk, the police will display the names and addresses of 51 protesters on billboards across the city. Speaking to media, the police said notices worth 2.8 million Indian rupees were sent to the protesters for damaging public property in December. They said further legal actions, such as the attachment of their properties, will be taken if they fail to deposit the due amount. Meanwhile, Delhi police have arrested a Kashmiri couple, accusing them of instigating protests against the new Citizenship Act. The police have alleged the couple was inciting Muslims to take up a violent struggle against the law and government. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has wished the Hindu community on the occasion of the Holi festival. Hindus celebrate Holi, the festival of colors, marking the start of spring and the end of the winter season. In a tweet, the Prime Minister said he prays this festival brings blessings and happiness for the community. Hindus across the world will start celebrating the 2-day festival at sundown today. Well, the total number of countries outside China affected by the coronavirus has now passed 100. The spreading disease has already claimed over 3,600 lives while infecting 106,000 people around the world. More on that now in this report.
The new coronavirus has now spread to many less developed countries with limited resources. States such as Bulgaria, Costa Rica, the Faroe Islands, and the Maldives have all reported COVID-19 cases for the first time. In Italy, the death toll has tripled in the past 24 hours. The United States must cope with 550 confirmed cases, while South Korea is still struggling to control the spread of the outbreak.
코로나19 확산이 It is true that the spread of COVID-19 has recently slowed down, but it's hard to say that the situation is getting better. Plenty of new cases have been found in Daegu and Gyeongbuk province, and in particular, many of them have been found in confined indoor spaces.
Germany, Greece, Austria, and Switzerland have all announced similar measures, including the partial suspension of some transport links. France has banned gatherings of over 1,000 people to stifle the disease's progress while the death toll rises. France has banned gatherings of over 1,000 people to stifle the disease's progress while the death toll rises.
À l'échelle nationale,
I remind you, tonight we are in stage 2. Maximum epidemic stage is 3 in France. It means that our priority is to do everything possible to slow down the circulation of the virus in the country. It is the only way to protect vulnerable people and to reduce the epidemic peak.
Several embassies in North Korea closed as many diplomats were flown out following weeks of tight quarantine restrictions in the country over the coronavirus.
Well, Seoul says North Korea has fired 3 short-range projectiles into the East Sea a week after launching 2 similar missiles. In a statement, South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff say the rockets flew 200 kilometers to a maximum altitude of 50 kilometers. The statement says the missile launch does not help bring peace to the Korean peninsula. Japan's cabinet secretariat detected multiple projectiles, but none landed inside the country's territorial waters. It said Pyongyang's repeated launches pose a serious threat to international security. This comes 2 days after the North threatened to take action to protest the condemnation of previous exercises. Now, the trial of suspects involved in the shooting down of a Malaysian Airlines flight over Ukraine is set to open in Amsterdam today. It is now over 5 years since flight MH17 was shot down, killing all 298 people on board as it flew over eastern Ukraine. Prosecutors say the 3 Russians and Ukrainian helped organize the Russian missile system used to shoot down the civilian aircraft. A Dutch-led international joint investigation team spent years collecting evidence before issuing arrest warrants last year for the 4 suspects. Countries taking part in the investigation agreed in 2017 to hold trials in the Netherlands under Dutch law. Attempts to create a UN-backed tribunal failed in the face of Russian opposition. Russia does not extradite citizens, and the Kremlin has questioned the legitimacy of the international probe and the independence of the court. The U.S. has said it did not veto a draft resolution on Syria's Idlib province at the United Nations Security Council on Friday. State Department spokesperson Morgan Ortagus says there was no blocking of anything surrounding a Syrian ceasefire. Ortagus said the U.S. will continue monitoring the situation in northwest Syria. She said Washington will consult with Turkey on arrangements for a lasting ceasefire. On Friday, diplomats claimed the U.S. blocked a UNSC statement supporting a ceasefire between Russia and Turkey. On March the 5th, both countries signed an agreement on a ceasefire and joint patrolling. This Women's Day, it is important to remember war's impact on women all over the world. One displaced Syrian widow and mother of 3 has turned to volunteer work near the Turkish-Syrian border to forget her sorrows. Here's her story.
White Helmets member Manal lost her husband early in the horrific Syrian conflict. Apart from working as a medic, she also cares for her 3 children. Right now, she's based in the village of Shmarin near the Turkish border at the heart of the Syrian war.
Many people would tell me to leave work and stay with my children, but I felt that just like my children need me, there are people here who need me. As everyone knows, we had a great shortage of doctors and medics in the eastern Ghouta. So I decided to resume my work while letting God help me with my children. These are the difficulties that faced me.
It's not easy work by any means, especially for a single mother. Manal says the people here, including medics, regularly struggle with crushing mental health issues.
There is no life if we do not adapt. We will feel depressed, our mental health will deteriorate. Sometimes I am tired, sometimes I am depressed. But then I remember the old times. We just want to keep moving forward. We want to overcome all difficulties and keep moving forward. In a world that needs us, we want to keep on moving forward.
One IDP says the refugee camps are especially hard on women.
Women's life here in the camp is truly very difficult. It is harder than you can imagine, especially in my case. My husband died in the war 5 years ago. I'm raising 4 orphan children.
The latest round of fighting in northwestern Syria has displaced around 1 million people. The brunt of this humanitarian disaster has been borne by the area's women, but their will to live on hasn't been extinguished.
In Libya, 2 people have been killed and 5 others wounded in an attack using rockets and mortar bombs by Khalifa Haftar's forces in Tripoli. The UN-recognized government of National Accord says the weapons hit a market in Al Jumu'ah and the Arada areas of the city. It said government forces destroyed a Haftar ammunition depot forces in Souq al-Ahad in response to the attacks. Libya has been torn apart by a civil war between the GNA and the Libyan National Army since April last year. Despite multiple efforts and ceasefire agreements brokered by the UN, both sides have been unable to agree upon a truce. On to Iraq, where hundreds of people have occupied Baghdad's Tahrir Square in protest against political corruption and for equal rights for women. The demonstration coincided with International Women's Day and highlighted the involvement of females in the protest movement. Protesters said female demonstrators are subject to torture, kidnapping, and assassination. They also demanded an end to interference in the country by Iran and the U.S. For the last 5 months, protesters have gathered at Tahrir Square to demand better job opportunities and public services. I'll be back after this break with plenty more news. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has submitted a request to delay his corruption trial scheduled for March 17th. Netanyahu has been charged with bribery, fraud, and breach of trust in 3 separate criminal cases. Netanyahu's lawyers submitted the request to the state attorney's office, citing technical reasons for the proposed delay. They argue that certain evidentiary material has not been delivered to them yet, requesting the opening court session to be delayed for 45 days. The request came as Netanyahu struggles for his political survival after failing to win enough seats in the 3rd election held in the country in the past 12 months. Egypt's President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi says Cairo will support Sudan's security and stability. Sisi said this during a telephone conversation with Sudan's Sovereign Council Chairman Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. In a statement, the Egyptian presidency's spokesman said Cairo's strategic stance is to maintain cooperation and coordination with Khartoum. Al-Burhan lauded Cairo's support in bringing stability to Sudan in its transitional period. Ties between the two countries became strained over the past few years on various issues, but relations have witnessed an improvement since the Sudanese army ousted former President Omar al-Bashir in 2019. Somalia's state media says a senior al-Shabaab commander has been killed in an airstrike. It said Bashir Mohammed Urqab was in charge of attacks on military bases and was also involved in operations in Kenya. The U.S. carries out frequent airstrikes in Somalia, but it has not yet commented on this report. Bashir's family has confirmed his death. In 2008, the U.S. issued a reward of $5 million for information on the whereabouts of the militant commander. Al-Shabaab is linked to Al-Qaeda and controls much of southern and central Somalia. On to the U.S. now, where Democratic presidential hopefuls Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders have secured crucial endorsements from prominent black supporters. California Senator Kamala Harris endorsed Biden, while Sanders won the backing of civil rights leader Jesse Jackson. The rival candidates are competing for African American support, a key demographic in the fight for the party nomination. Voters in 6 states go to the polls on Tuesday, a week after the Super Tuesday elections dramatically reversed the two men's fortunes. Harris said she was backing Biden because she believes he can best unify the country before the crucial November elections against Donald Trump.
So I just wanted you guys to know, because you've been supporting me for so long, and I just wanted you guys to know I have decided that I am with great enthusiasm going to endorse Joe Biden for President of the United States. I believe in Joe. I really believe in him, and I have known him for a long time. One of the things that we need right now is we need a leader who really does care about the people and who can therefore unify the people. And I believe Joe can do that.
Venezuela's Elections Council says a fire over the weekend destroyed most of the voting machines stored at its main warehouse in Caracas. The fire has struck ahead of parliamentary elections scheduled for this year. The Elections Council head, Tibise Lucena, says nearly 50,000 voting machines and almost 600 computers were up in flames. She said the electoral system has been damaged but is far from being destroyed. Lucena said the fire was a criminal act and has affected the inventory and machine production process. She said she had asked state prosecutors to look at what caused the fire. The South American country's elections have faced heavy criticism since President Nicolas Maduro's re-election was widely dismissed. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says spending on flood defences will be doubled to over £5 billion. His statement follows strong criticism by opposition politicians for not visiting flood-affected communities. In his visit to the flood-hit town of Birli in central England, he was heckled by residents who also called him a traitor. Explaining his late visit, he said a visit by a premier distracts from the hard work of rescuers. Johnson said people need to take precautionary measures themselves if they live in flood risk areas. He said the government will plant millions more trees to tackle water catchment areas.
We're doubling the budgets that we set aside for investment in flood protection across the country, from 2.6 to 5.2 billion. So we're looking at things like making these sorts of structures more permanent, more secure.
A large avalanche has killed 6 people on the Dachstein mountain in Austria. Police say victims were walking in snowshoes on the mountain when the event occurred. In a statement, the police spokesman said the victims are believed to be from a sports group based in the Czech Republic. Backed by 6 helicopters, mountain rescue services are searching for other survivors. Police said that bodies were brought to the village of Hallstatt for identification. In January, 60 residents escaped another large avalanche in the town of Ramsau am Dachstein. Maisie, a wire-haired dachshund, has won the Best in show at this year's Crufts Dog Show in the UK. The 4-day event hosted 26,000 dogs, including 3,000 from overseas. More on that now in this report.
The annual Crufts Dog Show has just ended for another year, but not before naming the 2020 Best in Show. The grand finale was a bark-off between 7 finalists. A wire-haired dachshund named Sylvie Trademark, known to her friends as Maisie, came home the winner.
Well, this is certainly a perfect example of the breed. And tell everyone here why Maisie is so special and also how many miles she must have covered on those little legs today.
Her proud owner, Kim Malkamet, said winning the Best in Show is one of her dreams.
Wow, what else can I say? It is pretty stunning. It's the sort of thing you often dream of when you're preparing coats, but you never quite think you'll get there.
The event dates back to 1891 and is one of the largest dog shows in the world.
Oil prices have suffered a historic collapse since 1991 after Saudi Arabia slashed prices and shocked the market by launching a price war against Russia. U.S. oil prices crashed by over 33% to $27.59 a barrel, while Brent crude plunged over 30% to $31.54 a barrel. The failure of the Vienna meeting between OPEC and Russia left the oil industry shell-shocked after Moscow refused to cut oil supplies as proposed by OPEC. Saudi Arabia announced massive discounts to its official selling prices for April as it prepares to increase its production to over 1 million barrels per day. The kingdom currently pumps 9.7 million barrels per day but has the capacity to ramp up to 12.5 million barrels per day. Oil prices have dived sharply this year as the new coronavirus outbreak has led to diminishing demand for crude. Asian markets, meanwhile, have tumbled following the fears of an oil price war after OPEC failed to strike that deal with its allies on production cuts. Investors are panic selling amid mounting concerns over the economic fallout of the coronavirus scare. The Nikkei 225 has slumped over 5% amid the rush to safe haven stocks. Seoul's Kospi is trading nearly 4% lower. Hong Kong's Hang Seng has lost over 3.5%. The Shanghai Composite has lost over 2%. Now, Lebanon's Prime Minister Hassan Diab has suspended a bond payment of $1.2 billion, saying the country's remaining foreign currency reserves are needed to meet basic needs. The decision has been welcomed by anti-government protesters, but there are also fears the move could lead to higher taxes. More on that now in this report.
Lebanon's economy has been in a tailspin since the early 2010s, with the per capita GDP reaching its lowest value since 2008. By the same time, the debt to GDP ratio reached 151%. It was these conditions that led to mass anti-government protests in October last year.
We cannot take more pain than this. I gave my wife 50,000 lira, but it's not enough to make a meal. If you have a family with 4 kids, it's not even enough for food.
For these reasons, protesters have supported Prime Minister Hassan Diab's decision to suspend the bond payment. But many fear the government's move is a sign that things might take a turn for the worse. People are most concerned about additional taxes.
They're talking about new measures that aren't going to be popular. They're saying new taxes on discretionary things. But if this is true, with all the ongoing problems with the dollar exchange and the banks and not having liquidity, things will explode. God help us.
Suspending the bond payment also means the value of the local currency could be slashed by as much as 40%. $1 is already worth about 1,500 Lebanese liras. As such, the country is likely undergoing the biggest risk to its stability since the end of its 15-year-long civil war.
Well, that is all from me for the moment. Thanks very much for watching this bulletin here on Indus News.